So I think we'll get started then. Yeah, welcome everyone. So today we're going to be discussing a little bit about analytics in digital marketing, focusing a lot on GA4, analytics mistakes, bogey metrics, and data transparency as well. So we've got the lovely Gerry White, Sophie Brannon, and Tiffany Shears with us today. So yeah, let's get straight into it. So first question I've got for everyone is Europe seems to be moving against Google Analytics and taking a bit of a stance against GA being against GDPR. So how much of an impact do you think that will have on digital marketing channels? And is it important to move reliance away from Google Analytics and have an open source data backup as well?
I think it's Google Fonts now as well, isn't it? Wasn't that announced today or something? It's going to break the internet.
I think the problem wasn't as much GDPR as it was, there was something else basically, which said that all of the information being sent to an American server meant that the American government could spy on people. And I'm sort of sitting here thinking to myself, how much do the American government want to spy on people in Europe? Probably a lot more than I realized. But the questions that kind of springs up are actually greater than almost the questions that kind of almost come around with it. But I know exactly what you mean. The fact that Google Analytics is being declared as being illegal in Europe is a bit of a strange one, because literally 80–90% of all my customers have used it in the past. Interestingly, the company that I work for at the moment actually do use something called Snowplow, and that means that we kind of own the data in a different way. We do actually have Google Analytics installed, but it looks like we might be removing that in the future, which will be fun for me because I've got no idea how to use half the data in the tools that we actually do use. So I'm busy learning how to use Snowplow and Looker and all this other kind of tools at the moment. So it's good fun.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that as well. I think, was it Andy Chadwick said something, and it was quite a few years ago, I think. It might have even been back in like 2014 or something about this, and about how it's really important to have an open source data backup so you actually own the data, because all it takes is for something like, whether it's GDPR or another law or something like that, to go, you know what, you can't use Google Analytics anymore, and all of your historical data is wiped. So I think it's really important that there is some sort of backup, that you do own the data, because even with, I know Tiff, obviously analytics is so important for you doing the PPC side of things. It's going to be impossible if you've got none of that historical data anymore.
Yeah, but to counteract that, owning and managing the data seems to be a bigger challenge for a lot of small companies than the big companies. So, I mean, to give you an idea, a lot of the small companies I've worked with, their analytics configurations have been so appalling, telling them to kind of actually manage a data store, a data lake that can kind of handle that much data. Just Eat, my previous client from 2 or 3 years ago, I mean, we did have all of the data that Google Analytics collected backed up into BigQuery, not just for that reason, but to give us kind of access to the kind of the rawer data. We could manipulate it and twist it however we wanted to. But you're absolutely right. You know, a lot of companies out there don't have a clear ownership of their own data. And I have heard of Google Analytics actually shutting down somebody's account because they've got personally identifiable information, or there's a lot of reasons that if you breach Google Analytics, they can shut you down. And especially as, you know, you're using a free service, there's nothing stopping them kind of just not supporting it anymore, or saying, actually, we're going to limit the amount of data that you've got. A good example of that is Google Analytics 4. They actually do say that, you know, that the data gets aggregated quite soon after you've collected it, which means that you can kind of do some analysis on it, but not the complete analysis over the kind of the history of it.
Definitely, and that leads quite well into the next question as well, which is about GA4. So it's had quite a lot of backlash so far. So what's all of your thoughts on the platform, and do you think it was a good move by Google?
So I think it's brilliant in many different ways. The downside is the fact that they kind of presented it to average marketers, and this sounds like I'm being a patronizing person. I was about to swear. But basically, they basically introduced it to average marketers who kind of got used to Google Analytics, who don't want to kind of learn a completely new system and don't want something that's a lot more advanced, a lot more different. And it is actually better in many, many ways. There's a lady who I recommend everybody follows called Jill Quick. She runs the coloring department, which is a training thing, and she basically said that actually it's like going from a car to a helicopter. You know, just because you can drive a car doesn't mean you can drive a helicopter. But they've removed things like bounce rate and all these other kind of metrics that people know and love, rightly or wrongly, And this really does mean that, in the future, they've got to completely understand a kind of very different way of working. And that also applies to the configuration. It's very much around like event driven rather than just kind of like page views. And those of us that kind of use regular let me rephrase that. Those of us that are kind of using kind of newer style kind of single page apps and progressive web apps and different website configurations kind of understand that, the old classic page view isn't quite the same as it used to be. So we should be kind of understanding that we want to look at interactions, but I, personally, have not got my head around the new GA4 yet at all. I mean, I've worked with a few clients where we've integrated it in, and I find myself spending 20 minutes trying to find something simple in there and then discovering it's not actually being tracked.
Yeah, I won't say too much on this because Tiff is like our resident GA4 expert anyway. But for me, I think the biggest issue with it, or at least where a lot of the backlash came from, is that they kind of introduced it, was like, yeah, it's still a bit in beta mode, then completely changed it. Like, at least in terms of the interface and on the first screen, I think that caused a lot of the backlash because it just confused people who were trying to start learning it in the first place. But generally, in terms of the metrics that it's showing, I mean, again, I haven't had too much of a play around with it. We're starting to integrate it with a lot of our clients now, really, more than anything. But the funnels and being able to really closely analyze where people are in this and at each stage in the funnel as well is just brilliant with GA4. So much better.
Yeah, I think part of the problem literally is I think people swapped to GA4 and got rid of GA, and that caused a lot of issues. I don't think they realised it was in beta mode. I know like we took on some clients where they only had GA4, and then we've had to switch the GA back on because you have to run the two together. So I think the problem is people just was like, oh, new system, let's just go straight on to GA4. And obviously it's completely different. There are some benefits of it. I have used it quite a lot now. I've been doing a lot of training on it for people in our company. So I'm slowly getting my head around it. It is just really different, but it's one of those things that you just need to dive into and you just need to take some time out. I think when I first did it, it was an absolute nightmare for me. It took me 2 days to learn how to do tracking. I don't think I've ever spent so long trying to do tracking, but I'm slowly getting my head around it now. So it's one of the things you have to practice. Apart from e-commerce tracking is a nightmare on GA4.
I agree with that completely. Yeah, that's
Unless
the one
you know
thing
coding.
It's so different at the moment, and the amount of people who are kind of going, but this is the data I want from it, and if it's not configured, you just can't get it quite as quickly. One of the interesting things is the fact that they have kind of built the approach of kind of you can pipe it out to BigQuery or you can pipe it out somewhere else much better than ever before. I mean, you could do that with Google Analytics Classic or whatever you want to call it, the old GA3. But in the GA4, they've kind of built it and said, one of the major things about this is you can push it into BigQuery and then do the analysis in there. And again, as you say, basically, most people, they struggle to kind of use the old Google Analytics, trying to tell them that, this data, it's all there. You just have to know how to kind of structure the query. That's quite a challenge for everybody, including myself. Sometimes I'll get the data out and I'll be like, this is wrong because I've kind of asked it to take the wrong aggregation of a metric, or something's just kind of slightly different to how I expect the data to come out.
Yeah, what I kind of recommend, which I know it's going to be like really slow at the beginning, but it's going to be one of those things where it's a pain in the short term, but better in the long term. But one of the things that I'm working on after I do the rollout is I'm going to look at metrics, at what metrics people need, what metrics do SEO need, what metrics do PPC need to do their jobs, and just build out standard funnel reports so that people just go into that funnel and they can see those metrics. Because you can build as many funnel reports as you want, so you could just do different reportings for different metrics that you need.
I'm very much a team data studio guy. I love Google Data Studio. It's not perfect. It's still very much the amount of times where I kind of go, I just want it to do one thing. Why won't it do that one thing? I'm trying to think of a good example, but it won't do certain things particularly well. And sometimes if you want data out of it that's not in the way it's structured in a different way. I don't know, Tiffany, are you a Google Data Studio person?
Yeah, we do everything on Data Studio here. I even use it for like Facebook as well, because Facebook's got that problem now. Trying to figure out the interface is an absolute nightmare. So like with Google Ads, I'll still go into the Google Ads interface to look at stats. But with like Facebook, I'll just go straight to Google Data Studio. And it looks like I'll probably be doing the same when GA4 gets fully rolled out.
I agree with you. I mean, basically, if you're building an interface for somebody, you can make it look very pretty, really sort of sexy and everything in Google Data Studio. And it kind of means that it's branded for the client, it's branded for them, and suddenly the key information that you want them to look at is there. That said, that deep diving behind it, that's quite different, and it does take a little bit of knowledge and understanding to kind of understand how to really get the data out of Google Data Studio. And I actually do use it as an interface to kind of do investigations. A good example is on the new website that I'm working on. We noticed a drop in people going to the recipe pages, and that was kind of one of our priorities. And so I kind of built a Data Studio report, basically an investigation into it, and built it all out using that. Again, as I mentioned, we don't use Google Analytics, so I've actually got to learn something called Looker, but that's definitely something I'm learning at the moment rather than actually mastered.
Yeah, I have two reports currently. I have the reports that I send out to clients of what they need to see, and I have the reports that are my internal reports for what I need to see to do my job.
I agree.
Brilliant.
One of the
Oh, go on, sorry.
No, go on.
Oh no, I was. If you've got anything else to say about that, I was going to move on to the next question. But if you've got anything else to say about that, then go for it.
No, go for it.
No, cool. No worries. Perfect. So moving on to the next question. What are some of the common Google Analytics mistakes that you see regularly on websites, and how would you recommend to sort of rectify them?
Duplicate tracking scripts all the time. just don't do it. Just set it up right in the first place, or ask for help. I think we get a lot of people who will integrate Tag Manager and have the tracking script on Tag Manager and in the head, and it just causes so many problems. And as long as it's picked up straight away before we do any reporting and things like that, then great. But if it doesn't, then it actually skews so much data, and it can cause so many issues, and it can impact strategy, it can impact your reporting. It all needs to be right from the start.
Yeah, definitely. We don't like seeing 2% bounce rates on reports and all the rest of it that is leading to duplicate tracking scripts. But we see that all the time.
I think the biggest mistake I see is people not writing purchase events properly or events properly. So like it will be, rather than doing a purchase event, they'll do something completely different. But then if it's not written as a purchase event, then Google Tag Manager won't be able to get the value from it. Or like one I had the other day, which it took me ages to figure out why. I was trying to track a click and the link wasn't tracking. And I was like, why is this not tracking? It should be tracking. It took me about literally like a good 40 minutes to realise that the reason why it wasn't tracking was because rather than naming the event GTM click, they named it GTM link click. So I had to figure out another way of tracking it, do more like a makeshift way of tracking it. So it's people just not doing the research and not naming the events right that I see is the biggest problem.
Definitely.
The big problem that I've seen recently quite frequently is payment gateways. So it's surprising how often they will kind of come back and suddenly PayPal or a social login even. Facebook is suddenly being attributed to a huge percentage of payments, of orders. And you kind of go, I don't never see a website where 60% or 70% of transactions are oh God, why can't I speak today? Attributed back to Facebook or social. And I'm sitting there going, this is crazy. And then I realize that the social login is overriding it. And it's quite challenging to kind of fix some of these problems, because you can't sort of turn around and say, just ignore Facebook, because then of course you're also ignoring the traffic as a source. And that one seems to be increasingly more common, because actually using social logins for logging into websites is a great way of doing it, because I can't remember all the passwords for all the websites that I've signed up to, even if I've got some kind of password manager. But the fact that I can use social login is really, really good. But of course, if it's breaking all the analytics, it does mean that somebody there, probably in the social teams, quietly partying away thinking, yep, I'm doing my job really well.
Definitely. Perfect. So the next question that we had is, how vital is Google Tag Manager working with Google Analytics?
It depends.
Knew he was going to say that.
To give a slightly more comprehensive answer, it's surprising how often you've got a great team who will basically go and, yep, I want to track this, I want to implement this, I want to be able to kind of track the scrolling here or do something or add some events in. And there's a guy there who'll work really well and he'll get it done like within hours or days. And then you find out that the guy's basically left the company or something. And now you want to track stuff. You want to put some JavaScript onto the website. You want to fix something. And you get told that it will take about 2 to 3 months for that thing because it's not a priority right now. And so if you want to track things quickly and easily and adapt things, if you want to update those tracking, you want to add in something slightly differently. I mean, one of the things that I used to do when I was back at my last agency was hack around with the analytics to kind of try and track as much as possible. I wanted to find out which one good thing that we did, for instance, is we could see which of the authors in the blogs were kind of getting the most views. So we could build a dashboard, a performance dashboard around who got the most reads on the blog posts and other things like that. But to track that, GTM makes it really, really, really easy. And I never had to turn around to anybody and say, hey, can you just put this on the page or fix this on the page? But GTM to work really well, Tiffany, you'll probably agree with this one, you do need a good developer to kind of make sure everything's right. But I do love GTM. One of the things you should know, though, is that a lot of people do block GTM.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tag Manager has so many more capabilities than I think a lot of SEOs in particular maybe give it credit for, and not kind of just for tracking. I think because with Tag Manager, it can allow you to really deploy custom JavaScript to your pages. So you can even add things like page titles or meta descriptions via this, which isn't ideal. Don't get me wrong, it's not an ideal situation. It can cause some user experience issues, maybe with page loading or something like that. But if you can't get access to the site, or you're waiting on a dev team to implement your page titles or your meta descriptions and the dev queue's 6 months long, then it could help you to get some quick wins. But it's not ideal, as I say, but it definitely has a lot more capabilities. And I think maybe a lot of people know and realise.
Yeah, I agree. On PPC, we tend to raise tags quite a lot because we'll raise tags directly onto analytics and directly onto Google Ads as well because of the different attribution models. So for me personally, I've learnt myself to use GTM at a really high level. So I can pretty much track anything now without having to go to a website developer. Apart from e-commerce tracking, I'll get them to check that over because of how complex it can be. But most tags, I can set it all up myself without getting someone to look over. If we didn't have GTM, every tag that I wanted to raise, I'd have to send that to a website developer to install onto the website. So if you're like in a team that doesn't have a big capability of having website developers to help you, GTM is definitely the way.
No, definitely. Yeah, completely agree with that. There's a lot you can do with GTM that, again, some people don't realise, or some people just don't take the time to sort of learn and sort of work out. But yeah, it does take a lot less developer assistance. So definitely agree with that. So let's talk a little bit about bogey metrics then. So what are the metrics that you would consider to be a bogey metric, and why?
Oh, I'm jumping right in with this one. Bounce rate and average time on site, which maybe the latter is a bit more controversial, but definitely bounce rate. Because as an example, right, so I'm a customer, I'm looking for a business's contact information because I want to give them a call about something. So I go onto their website, land on their contact us page, I find their phone number, I come straight off because I'm maybe on desktop or something, and then I give them a ring. And that's going to count as either a really low like average time on site, or maybe even a bounce if I haven't clicked on anything, or however it's been set up in terms of that. But actually that was a really high quality visit because I'm going to convert by calling. So and don't get me wrong, for me, they're bogey metrics, but I do think they're valuable in their own way. So, for example, it's really easy to tell if someone's messed up their tracking, like you said, Lewis, if there's a 2% or a 3% bounce rate on GA, that probably means they've got a duplicate tracking script or they've done something wrong. Or you can tell that a piece of content is genuinely performing well because the average session duration is strong, but you do really need to take it on a case-by-case basis, not be whether it's a client or whether you're an SEO or even PPC, having a look at a report and going, you know what, bounce rate's really high, this is not going well, or I don't know, this average session duration is really low. It needs to be page by page, case by case basis when you're looking at those kind of metrics. It can't just be a blanket thing.
Yeah,
I think you hit the nail on the head there, Sophie. All metrics tell you something. It's all about making sure that you like looking at the right metrics for the right reasons. Like I've taken over accounts before, not from other agencies, but clients have been doing themselves, where they've done things like they've tracked view pages as a conversion, while viewing a page isn't conversion, so you can't track that. You know, everything tells you something. You've just got to make sure that the metric you're using, you're aligning it with your goals. So, like you said about how the low bounce rate can tell you something's not working, I find that people over rely on sessions, but to me, sessions isn't really that important. The only time that I would really look at sessions is if I start seeing a drop of conversions, and then the sessions are dropping with the conversions, I know that something's wrong. But to me, like if it increases, because like with traffic, the main thing is traffic isn't always relevant traffic, and you need to make sure that what you are getting is relevant. And I think people over rely on that sometimes too much. But yeah, every metric tells you something. And it also depends what industry you're in as well, because I know what you said about average engagement, Sophie, but there are some clients, like for example, I have a charity client, and for them, average time on site is a really good metric because they're more informational than anything else. So if someone's spending 20 minutes on their page, they know that they're getting the right information, but you have to align the metrics with the page that they're looking at.
Yeah, completely agree. Oh, go on, sorry, Gerry.
No, I was just going to say I agree with basically everything Sophie and Tiffany have been both saying. In fact, I think I said all of this at a conference, and I'm sure Sophie was in the audience, so I feel like I've inspired her.
Clearly.
I've been ranting about this for far too long, basically, particularly about bounce rate. And the other one that I've ranted about, which is slightly different to the analytics tool, is the average rank in Webmaster tools. It's a completely bullshit metric, and the reason I say that is that if you're ranking really well for some like key terms and some branded terms and other bits and pieces, that's brilliant. But the long tail, you'll rank worse for. But the long tail is where a lot of the traffic comes in. So, if you start to rank worse according to your average rank, that probably means that you've actually got a better keyword spread and you've actually got more traffic than before. You don't want to lose that just because you're kind of ranking worse. It just means that, it's an opportunity to improve in those places. But again, the more that you improve, the more you'll probably find the average rank will go down because you're kind of getting more and more key phrases, more and more kind of longer tail. So this kind of obsession with average rank, and I see it on so many data studio reports, so many different places, and I kind of ask them, what is this average rank? And they kind of try to explain to me that it's a really important metric, and I'm kind of going, but I don't understand why you can use it or what it actually means. And then on top of that, there's another case with it where if it's like international, for instance, you start ranking in another country, you can sometimes rank in another country really badly, but you'll get a lot of impressions. I mean, often you'll find that, because you're kind of number 9 on a page for a product, but you don't sell it in that country, you're number 1 in the same in a different country, and that kind of really skews up your data. So yeah, average rank, totally hate it. And it's the same with conversion rate. I mean, one of the things that we do as an SEO agency, or you probably do as an SEO agency, is start to drive more and more people into content rather than the product pages. And again, this will drop your conversion rate, but it will increase your revenue. And understanding that, not everything is kind of directly, it's like one-to-one kind of relationship almost. Just because your kind of conversion rates drop doesn't mean your revenues drop. So you have to kind of understand how this kind of works. And attribution is one of those things that people talked about a lot for, oh God knows, about 5-10 years in analytics, but we just can't really do it. Cookies just don't work in the same way they used to. And people are in multi-devices. I mean, I've used 1, 2, 3, 4 different devices today, and none of them are kind of going to be hooked up as a user. So kind of attribution is something which sounds great, but we can't really do it comprehensively in the same way that we would like to basically sort of say, a user came in, saw a blog post, came back, bought something, and we will be able to do that maybe one day, but we certainly can't do it today.
Brilliant. Yeah, totally agree with all of them points. I think it does depend on the metric, but you need to be looking at it in the correct way, as you say, with bounce rates, looking at it page by page and taking a bit more of a deep dive into the data rather than just looking at it sort of at face value and taking that as a metric overall and thinking something needs to change, because it's not always necessarily the case. So yeah, no, brilliant. So the next question I had was, more and more people are using things like tracking blockers and intelligence tracking prevention. So how can we prevent this from causing data discrepancies? And are there any ways around it, like server-side tagging, and how effective are their methods?
Well, there are a lot of ways of tracking users without cookies. As you say, it's almost like server-side. Like I mentioned before, we use Snowplow, and that kind of gets us away from some of these issues. Even when it is using kind of cookies, it can be first-party cookies, which are essential for functional use anyway. Most websites actually completely rely on cookies anyway. So if you try and block all cookies, most websites will just fail. You can't add a product to a shopping cart, you can't log in, you can't do anything without kind of basic cookies. So, it is something where I don't think a lot of users, in fact, one of the things that I find hilarious about these cookie statements is, one, they're often completely wrong. You kind of look at them and kind of, it tries to explain to you what a cookie is, and you read it and it's like, nope, that's not what a cookie actually is. And secondly, most normal human beings that don't kind of hang around in Twitter spaces and places like that have no idea what a cookie actually is. So when somebody comes to a website and it says, do you accept my cookies? Most people have no idea what the heck that actually means. They don't know if it's a yes or no or anything. And if you have conversations with people about this, what they say is, oh, it's those things that stalk me around the internet. I'm like, no, they don't.
I get that all the time.
Being stalked around the internet.
Well, that's not what I meant, but that's Tiff, that is, stalking me with her ads. But yeah, like Lewis said, I mean, server-side tracking, using Tag Manager to implement all of that. ITP, I mean, I had to do a really big deck about ITP 2.2, and I think we're on something way, way further than that. So I've started to really just not want to read any more about it after that point, and after having to do all of that research about it. But yeah, there's ways around it. Server side is one, as Gerry was saying, with other analytics tools, the first party cookies. It's just finding those ways more than anything.
GA4 will be a good solution for it as well, because one of the things about GA4 is it's meant to use, okay, I'm going to try and get this word right, but I always get it wrong, predictive measuring or something like that, to basically fill in the gaps that we lose from cookie tracking. So that's one of the reasons why I encourage everyone to try and get GA4 now, because with anything that uses Google's algorithms, the longer you have something working, the more data you have, the more likely it's going to work better. But yeah, so GA4 is meant to have something predictive measuring, I think it is, that's basically meant to fill in the gaps that we lose from the cookies.
Perfect. So last question that we've got then for today is, will analytics tracking have to adapt to new experiences online, such as virtual try-ons and seeing my space experiences, or will the same principles of event tracking still apply for this?
I know, Gerry, you love your Oculus and your VR glasses, so I'm going to leave this one with you.
Yeah, I mean, the future very much is that, we're going to be interacting with everything differently. I absolutely have no idea, basically, is the short answer. But I know full well that everything's changing. Everything will stay the same.
Perfect. I think that about does it for today's Twitter Spaces then, for analytics in digital marketing. So thank you very much everyone for tuning in, and thank you for the guests, so Gerry, Sophie and Tiffany. It's been great to have you on. So yeah, thank you all for your time.
Yeah, thank you for hosting, Lou.
Thank you.
My pleasure. It's been amazing.
No problem. Thank you everyone, and we'll see you again soon.
Bye. See you later.
Bye.